Black smoke rose at the front line in southern Ukraine's Mykolaiv Oblast on the 30th of August 2022, when the world came to the edge of having another episode of World War III. The battle started when Russia captured a part of Ukraine. Russia's invasion of Ukraine is the biggest military mobilization in Europe since World War II. Though the Cold War between the two countries existed long enough to create barriers, Russia went a little extra mile to take the mass out of Ukraine. The attacked country urges to stop playing around with Russia, has recaptured 8,000 square kilometers of its invaded land, and aims to end its senseless war. Does the country have enough resources to beat mighty Russia? What are the differences between Ukraine and Russia? Who has the upper hand? Stay tuned to know everything about it. The impact of the war had raised concern not only for the party countries, but also for the entire world. Russia has been a significant member and among the big nations after the World War. Though it wasn't completely peaceful, but wasn't too reckless until it invaded Ukraine. Although how mighty Russia might sound, in certain areas, Ukraine is stronger, which is why it is still able to fight. Let's start with the country mass. Do you know how big is Russia from Ukraine? Russia is about 28 times bigger than Ukraine. Russia is roughly 17,098,242 square kilometers bigger than Ukraine, which is approximately 603,550 square kilometers greater. On the map, you would see Ukraine is kind of in the middle of Russia, which makes sense for the Russian president to invade the country and make it a part of Russia itself to clear out the unfitting hole in the map. Keeping obsessive disorder aside, due to Russia's position, it wasn't difficult for the country to invade Ukraine with even half of its might. Russia would easily be taking advantage of the geographical scenario and target the weakest spots, which it did. Moving on to the next parameter, manpower. Compared to Russia, Ukraine is way too small. At present, Russia has 900,000 active personnel in its armed forces with 2 million in reserve, whereas for Ukraine, the number of active personnel is 196,000 and 900,000 reservists. On a decree by President Volodymyr Zelensky, Ukraine stated to conscript reservists aged 18 to 60, with 280,000 troops against Ukraine's 125,600. Russia has a significant military advantage in the land sector alone. Additionally, it has an air force that is about 5 times as powerful as Ukraine's, with 165,000. However, Johann Michael, a research analyst who collaborated with the IISS assessment, stated that Russia had an estimated 200,000 personnel in and surrounding Ukraine with regard to the number of forces involved in this specific operation. He said, "That's included around 60 battle groups. The situation is evolving rapidly and that number could change, but it's very large and that's important. It's one of the largest in Eastern Europe that we've seen in years. In my lifetime, Ukrainian numbers are more difficult because everything they have now is mobilized and they have called in reservists." Next up, defense spending. This segment is going to blow your mind because the measure of disparity between the spending is huge. In 2021, Ukraine has spent $4.7 billion on the military. On the other hand, this spending is just over a tenth of nuclear-armed Russia, which has spent over $45.8 billion, according to the Military Balance report by the International Institute for Strategic Studies, IISS. After the United States, Russia is the second largest supplier of weapons worldwide. Since 2016, Russia has been responsible for almost 20% of global arms sales and supplies weapons to more than 45 nations. This clearly indicates the gap between the two nations. Ukraine's armaments are still mostly from the Soviet period, despite the fact that the Russian government began a campaign in 2008 to modernize its military after a brief conflict with Georgia exposed material shortages. However, Ukraine has changed the makeup of its armed forces as part of its aspirations to join NATO. By the middle of the 2030s, it hopes to restock its air force with Western combat aircraft. Additionally, it wants to strengthen its naval prowess. There is absolutely no doubt in the question of whose military is bigger. It's Russia. However, the nuclear-armed country still has been able to win over the entire of Ukraine. And that's because of the clever strategies Ukraine has been putting to use. Let's now move on to the weaponry and vehicles. Attack planes, armored vehicles, and surface-to-air missiles are just a few examples of the many things that may be compared. Overall, Russia just has more of everything. Russia possesses 17,677 infantry combat vehicles, 17,370 main battle tanks, and 14,991 armored personnel carriers, compared to Ukraine's 1,117 infantry fighting vehicles, 368 main battle tanks, and 268 armored personnel carriers. While Ukraine's Navy only has 28 fleets and no helicopters, the Russian Navy possesses 866 fleets, including 20 attack helicopters and 155 multi-role helicopters. In contrast to Russia's armed forces, Ukraine only has 3,143 fleets in the Army, 334 fleets in the Air Force, and 34 fleets in the Navy. According to IISS, where Russia has 49 submarines, Ukraine has none. The Russian military has always emphasized armor more than any other nation. They had the most main battle tanks, or MBTs. At the beginning of the invasion, many Western commentators predicted the worst for Ukraine due to the overwhelming amount of armored vehicles at Russia's disposal. Since the invasion started, 3,675 vehicles have been lost by Russia. Armored combat vehicles account for the biggest part of all lost vehicles, accounting for 1,865 units. To assist its forward deployed units, Russian military doctrine heavily employs artillery weaponry. Compared to the US, this resource-intensive strategy uses a smaller logistical force. Michael said, "There are big differences between the two forces. Russia has a much more capable air domain. Its air defenses are stronger. There's a huge difference on helicopters and planes available at every level, from transport aircraft to fighter aircraft to attack helicopters." The next one is the country's will. This segment possibly intends to provide a level playing field for Ukraine, perhaps even more. Before that, let's have a brief look at Ukraine's military background. The Ukrainian defense sector had a strong development. The nation served as a hub for the development of weapons under the Soviet Union. Since the beginning of the civil conflict in the Donbas area, where many of the defense industrial units are headquartered, in 2014, the sector has continued to collapse. When numerous Russians employed in the Ukrainian defense sector, ties with Russia were crucial to the country's defense industry. With a 35.5% market share, China was the country to which Ukrainian equipment was exported the most. It seems doubtful that the market will return to prior levels in the near future, given the ongoing war and Russia's targeting of Ukrainian defense production facilities. Nonetheless, Ukrainian forces have launched some successful counterattacks. The biggest strength of the Ukrainian armed forces, according to Michael, has been the soldiers' sheer resolve to fight. The very reason for this movement among the citizens has been their president's will. Michael says, "I'm really surprised at what I'm seeing. The fact that Ukrainian fighter jets are still flying, they actually took off, is impressive." Also, it needs to be noted that it'll be hard for Ukraine to fight back if Russia quickly seizes the capital. But if it fails, the fight can drag on for a while. And in that situation, Michael warned, Ukraine's will may prove to be a potent weapon. Hopping on to the last one here, modernization. In this part, we can see that Russia has had a better hand, whereas Ukraine does. That's because Russia utilizes a massive amount of its revenue in defense spending, updating all its armory. However, with battles occurring all throughout the nation, the quantity and caliber of armories play a significant role. The Royal United Services Institute's Nick Reynolds, a research analysis for land warfare, claimed that Ukraine's Air Force had been virtually defeated at this point. Reynolds told CNN, "There have been serious issues with modernization due to Ukraine's economic problems since 2014, so the military lacks modern air defense and artillery, particularly counter-battery artillery radar and other surveillance equipment to detect enemy artillery and at least stand some chance of suppressing it with their own. These capabilities are critical for Ukraine's army to be able to maneuver and resupply itself." On February 24, 2022, after months of preparation, Russia attacked Ukraine. Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, described the invasion as a special military operation that was undertaken to demilitarize and denazify its southern neighbor in response to what he saw as a severe danger. But to see the conflict between Russia and Ukraine as a David versus Goliath struggle would be incorrect. Ukraine, which has been given access to the most cutting-edge and sophisticated military equipment available to NATO, has the support of the whole Western world. Since the invasion, which the NATO members have referred to as an act of aggression, Russia has been isolated in all fields as a result of its activities in Ukraine. What's your opinion on the war and its global impact? Leave a comment below. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Also, press the bell notification to stay updated.